This is the Sattler Files.
Welcome back. This is the Sports Files on the Sattler Files, brought to you by Edge Employment Solutions. Hello to the team out there in Subiaco. I'm joined today by the great man Ric Gloede. And Ric, a touch of sadness today.
Very sad.
Yep. Have a good weekend, Mr. Walker.
Yeah, look, I'm very lucky. One day I hopped on a plane, went to Melbourne, and sat right next to him, just by fluke.
Yep. Did you have a chat to him?
He was just so courteous and friendly and humorous, and just a good fella. Whoever met him would like him straight away, I'm sure.
Well, someone of my vintage, I grew up with him, and as I said, have a good weekend, Mr. Walker, and him saying you too, son. I mean, it became part of the vernacular, didn't it? Have a good weekend, Mr. Walker.
And just been playing that on the radio.
Yep, that's what that was all about. Look, 68 years old, taken too young. Melanoma got him.
Yep.
So I guess for all of those sports fans out there that slip, slop, and slap, that became popular in the 70s when he was around, and he was famous. He never wore a baggy green. He wore his big floppy hat, but the skin cancer still got him in the end. So that's a warning to us all that. It can get you eventually if you don't slip, slop and slap.
Yes, in Australia in particular. But I remember the fellow who was Minister in England died of skin cancer.
Oh, Paul Eddington.
Yep.
Wow.
Not the public servant, the actual minister.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yep.
And he actually died of a skin cancer. So you can cop it anywhere, but I think that the main population now is a bit more fortunate, Tim, because we've got the plus 50s and things like that we never had when you and I were kids. We go to tennis, we put zinc on our nose, and the zinc would burn your nose.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue for the Waffle Grand Final there, Ric, because I went there on the weekend, got absolutely burnt to a crisp. My arms got red raw, my face, I had a cap on, but the sun was coming at such a level, my nose is red on my face. And I got home that night and I thought, geez, it was a beautiful spring day. It must have been 25. It was 16 degrees and I still got burnt. So
that would be the wind, I think.
Yeah, but still.
I remember once I went and saw a test match and I was up in the old stand, right up in the shade, and I went home like a cooked lobster.
Yeah, couldn't believe it.
It was all from wind.
So the Waffle, before we get to the AFL Grand Final, I want to talk about the Rugby League Grand Final a bit as well. I thought it was a great advertisement for West Australian football on the weekend. I got there early enough to see the Colts, and Claremont won that, and our own Peter Waterman, her young lad Jake, won the best player of field, and he looked a step above any player out in the Colts. Leads well, worked really hard off the ball. His work rate was impressive. So he got the best player. A little bit concerned at his height at the moment. Obviously he's a depth player for JK in 3 years' time if the Eagles take him under father-son. A bit short, I think. He needs another 2 inches to be a true centre half forward, full forward. And I'm not sure about his pace to be a flanker, but he's certainly got the talent.
Yes, I'm a bit concerned about the other boy. The other boys had a bad run with illness and everything, but they tell me he's a very fine player, and I hope he gets another opportunity because, the Waterman's a good bloodline, and there's never been a better player playing AFL than Muddy.
Yep.
Muddy in his position was as good as anyone who's played the game in my business.
177-game veteran, member of the 91 Grand Final side that lost, and of course the 92 and 94 premierships. The other player I was looking at, there's two players I also looked at closely in the Colts Grand Final, Ric, was the other Claremont boy, the Indigenous boy, Sam Petrovski-Seaton.
Yep.
Rumoured to go top 10, and West Coast and Freo are looking at him. But again, I don't think he did enough. He'll certainly get drafted, but he didn't do enough on the weekend. A bit flashy, like all those young Indigenous boys. Very light of stature at this stage. He needs to put on a kilo or two, but didn't do enough for mine.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's a reflection on him or maybe a reflection on how good the Colts competition is, Tim, because it's high quality. The standard of football in the Waffle is really high quality, and it goes down to those grades. They're very well trained. They've got good resources these days. And, to be outstanding there, you really have to be very, very good because there's a lot of great kids coming through.
Well, there is. The other fellow I was watching was actually playing for East Perth. He's an ex-Wesley College boy by the name of Sam Pepper Powell. Played in the 18s this year. Gee, he's a ruck rover. He's not tall. He's a yard off. He reminds me a bit of Dom Sheed in his pace sort of thing. But, geez, in the last quarter, he moved forward, kicked a goal for them, and got him up. and then went and split the pack with an almighty thump and showed no fear. And that's the sort of, I mean, that one act will be enough, I think, to see him drafted. But again, a bit too slow, carrying a bit of weight. But once they get into the true AFL system, that little bit of puppy fat changes to muscle and whatever. But he did enough. And it was a losing team, so he didn't dominate. But those were the three players from Western Australia in the actual Colts that I think will get drafted. There's a couple of boys playing in the higher grades. That, of course, Claremont's got a young ruckman, Darcy Cameron, in the league team that should get drafted. And then in the reserves, East Perth had only lost 4 games all year in the reserves, and they got done by Claremont in the reserves grand final.
Well, South had all 3 teams in the finals and never got one into a grand final. So that'll show you they're just very hard to win grand finals. Very hard. At any grade, Tim.
I've got to tell you though, Rick, there's a player that was playing for East Perth in the reserves, and I was telling my mate to watch him. And he won't be listening, but I'll give a big shout out to Aquinas College and a young lad called Tom Omaday, who's a relation to Mr. Omaday, the ex-politician. Now, Tom, I had a bit to do with him because I was coaching the Adelaide Bombers in the 15s and 16s where my son played. Tom came down to train with us in the 15s and 16s, was a bench player. And back in the juniors, back when you get to 15, 16, 17s, you really got to pick your best 18. And he couldn't crack the best 18. He was a boarder at Aquinas, couldn't crack the firsts, played in the seconds, and chose to get himself fit and go down to East Perth. Now, obviously, East Perth, like Peel, is one of the alignment clubs. It's very hard to do. So he's only a reserves player, but gosh, he's fit. He's got himself so fit. And, we were watching, he was getting, like every good midfielder should do, is getting the ball at half back, driving it deep into the forward line, and then all of a sudden, he'd pop up again with another possession. Outstanding game of football, and an outstanding achievement for a fella who didn't have obvious talent, but it just shows for young people that if you've got the will to succeed, and he's willed himself into that East Perth Football Club and is a valuable member of the club. Now, I think he's played 1 or 2 league games, but it was just great to see a fella, and I was really, really proud of him. So well done, Tom Omaday.
I read an article recently about the American gridiron recruiters, and there were stories in there about them not selecting the number 1 draft pick and picking some kid that sounds just like the boy you're talking about. They look for people that are doing those sort of things rather than the fella who's dominating the game just because of natural ability and natural physique at that age, and they look beyond that a bit. I remember I played a rover in first year high school to a fella called Doe Larson, who was a very big for his age ruckman. By the time we played under 18s, I was taller than Doe was. So some kids just don't, they grab hold of the nettle and hop into it and suddenly find out what's required, and they do very well after that. Yep.
Well, when I was at the Betts Group, the great CEO there, Danny Breckler, always used to say to me, hire for attitude, train for skills. Yep. And if you've got the right attitude, you can do anything in life. So that was good. And speaking of attitude, we then move on to the league game, Peel Thunder versus Subi. Bit of a slow start, the first 15 minutes, and then Thunder were peppering the goals, and I think it was 9 scoring shots to 1 at quarter time. Subi wouldn't give in. It was one of those games, Rick, that I kept wanting to go home, because I was hot and getting sunburn. And I thought the second quarter, about the 20-minute mark, I said, I'll blow this. I'm going to go home at half-time. Then Subi kicked another, so they're only, I think, 15 points down at the long break. And then I thought, in the third quarter I'll go. And Subi kept coming, and I don't think it was really until probably the 10-minute mark of the last quarter that Peel really got on top of them. But I thought it was a great game, good advertisement. And what really struck me was the alignment hoo-ha we'd had that Peel had 17 players from the AFL system playing. But those guys seemed to play with real passion for the jumper. And that was pleasing to see.
Well, there's probably a reason for that. I went through some of the figures of the people who played, and, of the players who played for Peel that day,
yes,
and I'm not sticking up for them because I think there has to be a change made. It exposed a weakness,
yes,
and football's good enough to look at those weaknesses and sort it out. I'll talk about that a bit later too. But in Peel, players who played 5 games, which is qualifying to get into the Waffle Grand Final, was Apinis, Silvani, Blakely and Yaron. Now, Yaron had a fair bit to do with the game, and Blakely won the Simpson medal, But then from 6 to 10 games, right, you had Zach Clark, Langdon, Tendai Mazengu, Darcy Tucker, Sam Collins, Clancy Pearce, and Ethan Hughes. And even more than that, 11 or more games, Matt DeBoer and DeLuca and Nyhouse. Nyhouse, I think that. I don't know how you say his name, but I mean, so they had a lot of boys that had actually played a lot of peel waffle football. Tim, the only time they don't get to be with them is during the week they train at the Fremantle Football Club, but it still probably was outlined by the reason they won was that they did have that extra bit of class because, as you say, Subi just kept at them all day, didn't they?
Well, they did, and none better than the captain, Kyle Horsley.
Fantastic player.
Got as many votes in the Simpson as the winner, but of course it was the umpire's deciding vote that tipped them over. But I think he got 32 possessions or something, and that was, I'm saying, he was one of the reasons why I didn't go home, because he was willing himself into the game at all times. He kicked a couple of goals and played brilliantly. And he was a bit of a lone soldier for them, because a few of their players that we expected to stand up for Subi, who'd done so all year, didn't come to the party. Lachlan Delahunty, the ruckman, didn't perform. Hamish Shepherd at full back. Silvani completely blanketed him.
I thought you were a bit hard on Delahunty. I thought Delahunty's game around the ground was pretty good.
Okay.
He just got knocked off because he wasn't tall enough to play against
Clark
and
the
John
other
Griffin.
Fella. Yeah.
But Tim, so I googled a few things this morning.
Very good, very
Players
good. Players
eligible for the Sandford finals. They must have played more Sandford games than AFL games this season. They must have played at least 3 Sandford games after June 30th.
Yep.
The club can apply for a permit in situations involving injury, suspension, or extenuating circumstances. And that takes us over to the Victorian system in the VFL.
Yep.
And that's a little bit different again. But let me just find the part that I think is most pertinent. And that is a player who is to play in the finals must be subject to Rule 20, which says a player who has played in an AFL home and away match after 1 July in the relevant season will be ineligible to play in VFL Senior Grade or Development League Final Series matches unless that player has played in a combined total of at least 6 Senior Grade or Development League home and away games in the same season. So that what that boils down to is over there they have to have played at least 7. All right, but then it's hard for when we have an aligned, or they like to call it a partnership model rather than alignment club,
yep.
Tim. And I think that's the way to go. But in Victoria, you had the added problem that came along, which probably caused a few ructions over there that we never read about, and that was the bye that the AFL brought in, because then you had players who hadn't maybe played in an AFL team, a partnership team, for 3 weeks coming back from injury that wouldn't get a chance to have a hit for another week. So they had to take that into account. Now, if we're going to have a partnership club, you've got to show empathy to the 2 AFL clubs as well as your own competition.
Yep.
But I don't think that we could possibly afford to have that same situation arise again. It'll just be it'll denigrate football too much. I think there has to be some limit on the amount of players that can play.
Well, Rick, as the non-executive chairman of independent presidents of the Waffle, I'm sure that you'll be all over that this summer and get it fixed before next March.
Yeah. Well, it's not up to me, of course. It's up to the WA Football Commission. But I think with a little bit of
steering.
A little bit of sincere attitude to it by all stakeholders, that we'll solve the problem. It wouldn't have happened if the Dockers had been in the finals.
Absolutely. Now, the final word on that grand final, as I said, so there wasn't a lot to see with the AFL, with players being drafted. But the boy from Subiaco that everyone's talking about, the Indigenous boy, I think Liam Smith or something.
Liam Ryan.
Liam Ryan. What do you think?
Never got a touch.
No. Kicked one in the first quarter.
Off it.
Yeah.
But then so was Yaron initially, and Yaron was terrific.
Yep.
So, he was a bit of a problem child for his own club, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But Liam Ryan, I saw him the week before play against South, and he was just terrific.
Yep.
He's got to put a bit of
beef on.
And he's got to learn to read the play a bit more than he does. He's trying to take a specky, and he's very good at them, as is Yaron. But you see the difference between him and Yaron, and you would have seen it. When the ball came down to Yaron, it was very... They always say that it's good if a player can deliver the ball to the full forward, but when the full forward uses his body and gets in position like Yaron, makes it easy for the midfielders too, doesn't it?
Yeah, good player. But as you say, it would have hurt Subi, premiership hero with them last year, and then to kick 5 for Peel. And if he'd played out the game, he would have gone very close to the Simpson. So young Ryan, you think worth drafting him this year, or do you reckon wait for another year in the waffle?
Well, I think they'll make their choices on that. But the boy's an AFL player. He's going to be really... I mean, he's just terrific.
Yes, but he's not going to play AFL next year. So if he gets
but
picked up by someone...
I think they'd like to get him into the system.
Yeah.
Get a bit of weight on him and a bit of muscle, and teach him a bit about the game and what's required. Not that he's not getting that sort of teaching already. I think Schofield's a great coach. Yeah,
no, very good. Okay, we'll move straight to the big one now, the AFL Grand Final. We don't need to do the Brownlow because I don't like Patrick Dangerfield, so I'm not even going to talk about the Brownlow. Aaliyah has been ruled out today by Sydney, and now that was obvious. The way he went down with that knee in the first quarter, he was never going to get up. But that's a bit of a dream that's over for the young fella. He's a 10-year player in the AFL. He'll get another chance with Sydney. But I think he's going to get a fair bit of airplay over this, but I think for cultural reasons as well. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull mentioned him at the UN, for goodness sake, Malcolm, what were you thinking? Why didn't he mention Nick Naitanui? But that's another story. But Aaliyah's a tremendous character.
Well, Nick doesn't come from... Africa, he's a Fijian, of course.
No, but he's multicultural and whatever, and he's playing.
We are multicultural.
Yeah, I know, but I just thought Aaliyah. I thought.
And you're right, Nick is a great advert for multiculturalism, isn't he?
He could have mentioned Majak Dor or whatever. So
the mark of the year.
Yep. But so anyhow, Aaliyah is out, which is a pity. Yeah. So and then Sydney, Jared McVeigh, that calf injury is only 15 days old if he fronts up now. Calves are 21 to 28 days. Sure, he's the captain or the co-captain. Surely they couldn't pick him, Rick.
I think he'll tell them whether he's fit or not. He's that good a person and he's that good a player.
Okay, well,
good players always tell the coach whether they're fit.
Well, I think they'll give him a late fit because he couldn't have declared today that he's fit. Yeah. He wouldn't have gone at 100% today.
An awful shame. He's just near the end of his career, and I think he's been a very good advertisement, as has his brother, the kid from Essendon. I think they've been great. Advertisements for the game.
Callum Mills, it'll be 21 days on Saturday for the hammy, and hammy's 21-day injury, they say.
How do you drop anyone from the team that beat the Cats? That's the other.
Oh, they had one passenger, a young fella in the forward line called George Hewitt. Papley was magnificent.
Millsy plays in the back line.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. He could. I mean, someone's got to come in for Aaliyah.
Yeah.
And the Bulldogs have got to. Well, it depends if Roughhead plays, which is another thing on the Bulldog side. Because my late father was a devoted Sydney Swans fan, and he'll be looking down from heaven again this weekend. I love romance, Rick. I love romance in life. I love romance in footy, and I want to see Ted Richards.
Like romance, how can you not like Dangerfield?
He's not a romantic. He's an arrogant. He's an arrogant man.
The enduring memory I've got of Fife winning the Brownlow last year is the duel that he had with Dangerfield in Adelaide.
Yeah.
And they were both sensational, but Fifey pipped him, and I think that might have won him the Brownlow medal that game.
No, he won it by a street.
And I've never seen him do anything other than be a sportsman, and you think he's a bit up himself by the sounds of it.
Oh, I do, Rick, but I might get done for the Sattler Files podcast. I had a listener from Texas call me today and want to listen in, so we go all around the world. So Paddy Dangerfield's having Wacky Wednesday down in Geelong today. He may be hearing me cane him, so I better back off there. But I will say I think Mills will come in definitely for Aaliyah. But I would love the romance of sport of Ted Richards to come back. 273 games, 274 would be his last.
What about the romance of the poor old Bullies? You've got enough. They haven't won one since 1954.
I'll tell you, I bleed red and white. My father brought that up with me. And the great Peter Bedford is going to present the Premiership Cup. Now, he's a 1970 Brownlow medalist, only got to play in one final. He's Bob Skilton, gosh, Bob Skilton was better than Ted Whitten, Rick. I mean, for goodness sake, don't start me.
Yeah, that's a big statement.
Yeah, well, I like to make big statements. But anyhow.
Well, he won 3 Brownlows, so
he must have been pretty good. Yeah. My brother, Vincent, said, I remember having a beer with him one day and watching the Eagles and saying, who's the best player you ever seen? This was in the Chris Judd era. And he'd seen Bobby Skilton. He said Bobby Skilton was better than Chris Judd. Yeah. So that's a big call. So injuries.
Well, I think John Todd was better than any of them.
Well, he was. Imagine if he hadn't have done that knee, he would have been a superstar.
He was a freak, mate.
So there's something to happen at Sydney.
Before you go.
Yeah, I've got a lot more to say.
Your international friends listening.
Yeah.
My daughter was international this week. She ran and finished the Berlin Marathon the other day.
Oh, my God.
And she's pregnant.
Oh.
So there you go.
That's a great effort. Is she still there?
Well done. Well, she lives in New York.
Oh, well, is she back in New York listening to us?
No, she's in San Francisco now, but she's been back to New York and now over to San Francisco. Next week she goes to India, so I hope she doesn't go in the Tibet Marathon if it's on.
No, you don't want to do that. So, before we move to the Bulldogs, final word on Sydney. Aaliyah is out. Who do you think comes in, Mills or Ted Richards?
I'd go for Ted Richards.
Okay, good call. I like you, Rick. I've always respected your judgment.
I think that he deserves it for one thing.
Yep.
But I heard his brother, I think, on the radio today, I might have read it somewhere, where he said, well, Teddy's my brother, but the coach will pick the best side he can, and that's what you've got to do in football. So I think the coaches will take a very good look at the whole thing. I mean, I don't know if you must know Paddy Love.
Yeah, I know Love.
Paddy's been grizzling like hell all week about who was it? I might have got Paddy wrong with someone else. I've lost my train of thought.
Okay, we'll come back to it. So I'm with you. I think Teddy Richards might come in because I think the only reason I'm thinking of Teddy Richards is if the big fella from the Bulldogs gets up Roughhead with that eye injury and play. If Roughhead doesn't play...
Roughhead will play.
So Roughhead will play. That means that Teddy Richards has to play because they need the height.
Yeah,
Mills
I think they only kept him out of the game the other day because it was his eye.
Yep.
And I think that you'll find he'll be all right.
No concussion, it was just blurred vision. Okay, and then they've got the other one. They've got a couple of interesting ones there. Matt Suckling, who is a Hawthorn premiership player, so he adds experience. He's got that Achilles problem, didn't play last week. Now, if he comes in, they're saying that the fella that could drop out for the Bulldogs would be Fletcher Roberts, who played on Jeremy Cameron last week and absolutely thrashed him. So, grand finals are full of bad luck, sad luck stories, aren't they, Rick? So, I wouldn't. If I was the Bullies, what they did, why would you mess around? I'd leave Suckling out. If I was them, if Roughhead's free and Fletcher, what they've done, if I was the Bullies, I would name an unchanged team.
Well, their coach was named the coach of the year this morning by his fellow coaches, as I understand it, and I'd have full faith in him to pick. He's done a wonderful job, Beveridge.
Yep.
With a bunch of great young kids, but no superstars.
Yep.
Unless you want to put Dalhouse in that bracket, because I think he is a superstar.
He will be a star. So anyhow, no changes for me. I'll give you a little story. I hope you've heard it, Rick, that you would, being across a broad spectrum of the football society in Australia. Last week, a lot of the Bulldog supporters in a bus travelling across the border to go to Sydney for the game through Albury-Wodonga on the border. I don't know if you've ever been there. I've never been there, but I know it's on the border.
Place.
Yep. Luke Beveridge goes inside, pays for the breakfast for the busload. How good is that as a let's forget about football. Let's talk about his values. Isn't that a lovely, sentimental thing to
not
do?
the players.
No, that's what I'm saying, the supporters.
Yeah, isn't that fantastic? Yeah.
Goes in, pays for the truckload of, the busload of support, leaves a message. Here you go, I've paid $10 each, paid for all your breakfast this morning. Yeah. I just think that's a testament to the man of what he is as a people person, and he's got some good heart about him, and that's why the Bulldogs love him, the supporters, but the players really play for Luke Beveridge. He is a coach's, a coach's man. Players to a T are playing out of their skin for him.
As I don't have any alliance there, I think that Sydney will bolt in.
Yep.
But I'd love to see the Bulldogs win it, obviously, because of the fact they've only won one in their whole history for openers. And I have a lot of empathy for supporters who've been through that. But when you hear stories like that, that's what the Western Suburbs is all about. they stick, don't they? I mean, but Brad Hardy's a very good friend of mine, and Brad said the best thing about playing for Footscray was the supporters. He said they were wonderful.
Yep.
You know?
Oh, well, Brad, he'll be beside himself on Saturday, won't he?
Yep.
So I'm going for Sydney. So you're definitely going for Sydney. How many points?
I'm going for Sydney by 32 points.
Yeah, I'm going for Sydney by 28. Okay. But I don't think it'll be over until the last quarter. The way the Bullies play, they come at you. They're a very fit team, and they're fast hands. They've got a lot of leg speed, like Johansson and Lockie Hunter and whatever, but they're fast hands. They are the best user of the ball by hand.
Well, I thought they were until Saturday. I thought Sydney's ball handling was so quick on the weekend. That's what broke them away from the Cats. The Cats were quite cumbersome in comparison. And I think if you go back to the West Coast Eagles Bulldogs game, that's what won the game for them there.
Yeah.
Because I sincerely thought that West Coast, and I wasn't being, in my heart, I just thought that West Coast logically would win by 8 or 9 goals in that game. And the Bullies just came out and crowned them, mate. And there's a lot of people hoping that'll happen again, but I don't think so.
So we've done that. We're not going back to the Brownlow, except for Alex Lloyd. I mean, what was that? Was that a Meatloaf impression with Alex Lloyd, or what was he doing? What was he thinking? The tie. I don't know what the tie was. It was just draped around his neck. Was that his ode to Gillan McLachlan that it must be black tie or something? It was just stupid.
I'll tell you what was interesting. I'm not going to talk about Dangerfield, but in the Brownlow, if you look at the list of Fremantle players who won votes, Lachie Neale got 20. Fife got 4. Everyone else was down the list from that. That's amazing. Comparatively, the Eagles, Gaff got the most with 21, Kennedy 17, Priddis 17, Shuey surprisingly only 10, and the one I would have backed to win it as an outsider if he had have played all games, shows you how good a judge I am, only got 1 vote, and that was Natanui. Only played 14 or 15 games, mate. But he still only got 1 vote. That surprised me. I thought some of his early games he was just sensational.
Now, Rick, I'm not a prude. I do enjoy a beer, and I enjoy a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. But what did you think of Josh Kennedy sculling on national TV every time he got a vote, with all the young kids watching on TV? What tone did that set?
Which Josh Kennedy?
Josh Kennedy for the Eagles.
The Eagles.
Him and Jared Schofield, or not Jared, Will Schofield, were sculling each time Kennedy got a vote.
Well, it's a little bit reminiscent of our friend, the Carlton full forward, wasn't it?
Favola.
He made a fool of himself, but it just doesn't sound like Kennedy. Kennedy's usually right up there in setting the standards. And
no, Channel 7 showed it quite regularly, and there was a bit of stuff on social media. As I said, no prude, love a beer, love a wine myself. Grew up with dinner parties and the kids, seeing us all, having a good time. But these men now are role players, and I think it's a bit like Mad Monday's sort of gone. They've kept it under wraps now, and they don't want to publicise it. Plenty of time. He said that that they had a babysitter upstairs, and it was time to enjoy the night. But I just didn't like it.
With respect to that, I'm a little bit concerned where footy's gone on that, Tim, because I'm an ex-army officer. I was serving in Victoria Barracks in Melbourne. And a very good friend of mine, Keith McKenzie, was coaching North. And he took myself and my wife to every game. And after every game in the VFL in those days, the opposition club would come down underneath the stand, which is where your change rooms were, and they would all have a beer, and quite a few beers. Nowadays, they don't even know each other. They don't get to meet each other. To me, that's an awful shame.
I agree with that. I agree. It's too professional. But as I said, if you want to have a beer and get yourself schnozzled, which I think the players are entitled to do when they're 6 to 7 weeks off, don't do it on national TV when you get a lot of kids watching.
I wonder whether they knew they were getting caught.
Well, I don't think they did. No. So now we're finished with the AFL. We've done the waffle. We've done the late, great Mr. Walker. We need to finalise with my team. And it's all about me, Rick. It's always about me. Melbourne Storm versus Cronulla. I've always on the Storm. I think Cameron Smith is one of the greatest captains in Australian sporting history. Are you following that at all, Rick?
Of course I do. I follow it every week. But I think you're going to get your bum kicked this week.
What?
I think the Sharks are like the Bullies, only they're better.
Gee, it's in Melbourne. No, it's not in Melbourne. It's in Sydney. Sorry, yeah, go on.
And I'm a Storm fan too.
Oh, okay.
And particularly a Cameron's fan. I think you're right. Cameron is a great captain, not only of Storm, but I think Australia, isn't he?
Yep.
And, I mean, he never puts a foot wrong. He's just... he and the little fella from... Oh, he's not that little, I guess, but he looks little compared to the rest. The fella from Gold Coast... not Gold Coast, Townsville. Thurston.
Jonathan Thurston, yep.
Jonathan Thurston. Just two great examples for sport in Australia, and Lord knows, after what you just said a minute ago, we let ourselves down a bit, but they showed you a thing on the television the other night about him coming off after they've been beaten, and the way he treated kids on the boundary and other players and everything like that was just, it set the example, and I think Cameron's very much like that. He's terrific.
True role model. There's only one thing that's sure in sport, and I said it on the weekend. I knew there was going to be a bit of biffo with Subi and Peel, and I was surprised it waited until three-quarter time for that brawl. But there's a fella playing for Cronulla that just he's a bit like Hayden Ballantyne. I think his name's Michael Ennis. He is antagonistic to... He's like a fly.
He's the one who said that we have to stop Cameron.
Yep. And I think it's his last game. And I know the NRL is trying to cut out the biffo and the high tackles and whatever, but I guarantee you this will be a large. I'm going for Storm in a close one because I'm after them. But you know, Gallen, the captain, it is going to be a titanic struggle, and it will be close, and they will belt the living bejesus out of each other, I reckon.
Yeah. Great coach for Melbourne, but the other player that I think is a superstar there, both at this level and Australia and internationally, is Cooper Cronk.
Yep.
Cronk is just an amazing player, and there's a fella in rugby union like him, Cooper.
Quade Cooper.
Yeah.
Yep.
Similar player.
Yep.
And I just love watching those fellas play.
Yep.
Shame we haven't got number one in there for the Storm.
Who's that?
Oh, what's his name?
Billy.
Billy.
Yeah, Billy Slater. Yeah, well, I think his body's taken such a buffering over the years that he's on the downward slide. So, no, Melbourne Storm for me, 17-15 will be the result. There'll be a huge biffo. Now, you're hobnobbing and flying off to the AFL Grand Final this weekend. What about Sunday? Will you be able to watch the NRL, or will you be on a plane while it's on?
I'll be back in Perth on 9 o'clock on Sunday.
So you'll sit down
Sit down and have a look.
Yeah, good. And your final result?
I don't really know enough about it, but I just think that the Sharks have got a bit of momentum, so I'll go 32-11.
What? 32 to the Sharks, 11 to the Storm.
That's it.
Oh, Rick, I thought I was a romantic. You are getting carried away, my friend. You are getting carried away.
I'm getting right into you, Tim.
It's been a good show, Rick. I've enjoyed it. Next week we'll do post-mortems on the AFL Grand Final. There'll be no Brownlow talk, thank God. We'll talk a bit about the NRL Grand Final, and of course, cricket starts. So we'll be into the Bradman-esque game and talking about it. We might even go... That's the tap they used to do when they got a run. Remember, Bradman used to do that. But anyhow, I digress. Despeen, thank you for producing today. It's been a lovely show, and that was the Sports Files on the Sattler Files.
This is the Sattler Files.